Hello, and welcome again to Talking Baseball with Leon Lee. Today is July 23rd in 2018, and we're here again in hot Sacramento, California with Leon Lee and Eddie Cervantes. How are you guys doing today?
Hot, as usual.
It's warm, but it's good to be here with you, Steve.
Yeah, well, today, guys, I know we wanted to talk a little bit about youth baseball, a little more emphasis on youth baseball. Again, we've done a couple podcasts on that where we've touched on some of those subjects like winning versus development. But I think today we want to get more into how we can influence or possibly change some of the youth development these days, and with some of the things we've been seeing from the coaching perspective. We'll just get started with that, Leon.
Well, obviously, this is a well talked about topic. I mean, the game has changed over the years, and we have a lot of talk about kids not playing pickup ball, not really being allowed out to play, baseball on their own and so forth, and how now some of the coaches are taking over the game, and sometimes the attitudes and the actions of parents are pretty extreme. But I was having a conversation the other day with a good friend of mine, and she has two sons playing Little League baseball. Her name is Bridget, and I want to call her name out because I want her to listen to this podcast to say, basically we were going to have that discussion about some of the coaching and how critical, and I think destructive type of criticism that they're bestowing on the kids nowadays, and I think that's something we need to talk about. What do you think, Eddie?
I agree. There's been a huge decline over the last few decades. I don't know how far back to go, but the coaching, like you said, it is a critical situation with how they conduct themselves in general. And, in the past, in that respect, you had to hand it to them. They're volunteer parents. Way back in the past, they're volunteer parents. They're doing their best. But back then, they weren't overly consumed about themselves. It seems, now it could just be what I'm experiencing, but it seems like coaches now, even at those youth levels, they have a tendency to impart information that they hear and not necessarily know.
Right.
And I think that's the biggest problem when it comes to coaches. At
they
the
haven't
youth
played
level.
pro ball, but don't you think the expectations are, we've gotten stats. I mean, number one, with data coming back, kids 6 to 8 years old, 6 to 8, 10 years old, shouldn't be playing really that much baseball. I mean, the stats are saying, and a lot of the data are saying that a lot of kids are just inactive. But at the same time, we could talk about data and stats, but I hear these terminologies from coaches where they're calling kids stupid, idiots. It's totally unacceptable. Or they put a kid in. Now, if you're an 8-year-old kid, 10-year-old kid, and a coach gets mad at you about something and he asks you this question, to me, this is one of the most debilitating questions a coach can ask. What were you thinking? I mean, it really puts a kid up against the wall, because how do you answer a question like that? When they go, what are you doing? Well, I think I'm trying to make a play. I made a mistake, but I mean, what do I do? What do I say here?
Well, and that's the problem, is that at that moment, a young kid of 8, 9, 10 years old, he's going to shut down.
That's right.
He's going to shut down. He is being put on a spot by an adult, and now the learning process stops. He hasn't a chance to figure out what happened on that play, and even if he doesn't know, at least he can start trying to figure out in his head what happened, and then now with constructive criticism, he can come to a conclusion on something and learn something from
Exactly.
it. But when that happens the way you're saying it happens, raising the voices and putting the kid on the defensive, he shuts down.
He shuts down.
And
And there you go to another stat. There's another stat that says 70% of kids after 12 years old quit because, number one, they're just not having fun. And number two, they don't really have a voice. I mean, if I went constantly to an organization or any sort, and if I went there all the time and I never had a voice, well, it just doesn't seem like I belong there. And most kids, they want to feel accepted. They want to be loved. They want to be understood. You know, they want to have a voice no matter how old they are. But if they're playing on a team where the coach says, it's my way or the highway, well, it's the highway for me. Because if I don't have a voice there, and even a 7-year-old could feel that, or an 8-year-old, they want to go out on the field, number one, and have fun. Now, we understand baseball's not fun and games. You want to teach a kid how to focus a little bit, but the fun part is understanding the game. So as a coach, we want to teach them and not destroy their confidence and their self-esteem. Our job is to build confidence and to build self-esteem, and I just don't see that happening in youth baseball now.
Well, I'm sorry, Steve. Go ahead.
Well, so how do we fix that, or how do we go about resolving that issue of coaching issues? I've seen some leagues, and I've actually gone through some online programs where they require some sort of certification program, little few-hour course to go over some basic fundamentals, some basic ways to go about practices and games and interaction with parents and interaction with the kids. But that may deter from the strict, like you said, Eddie, they're just volunteers coming out. Maybe if they have to get certified or go through some type of approval program, they might not even do it. So what is the solution?
You could talk about it, Steve, and we could have those discussions. But a coach could be the nicest, mildest mannered. He loves the game. He's given his time, like Eddie says, and he gets out on that ball field, and it's a 1-to-1 ball game, and his son is at the plate, and he swings at a ball over his head, you know, and strike three, and all of a sudden, all those other emotions come out. Like, it's embarrassing. It happens to be my son, even if it's not. But that pressure of the situation, if that coach hasn't played or he hasn't been in those situations, he really doesn't know how to act. So a lot of times they get emotional because they're worried about what the fans are thinking, that what kind of coach are you if you haven't taught them how not to swing at a high ball or how to catch that ground ball or how to not get thrown out at the bag. And, you know, coaches take it personal. And that's a training that they need to have before they step on that ball field to coach a kid.
What comes to the forefront in that situation is it's about winning that game and not learning something from that game, whether you win or lose. And that's what's most important when you're dealing with kids, is teaching the kids that, you know what, and it goes right back to being able to have fun. It's a game.
Yeah.
Baseball is a game.
And voluntary.
And what do kids learn when they are playing a game, whether it's some board game, when they're a child in school or out on the playground and, you know, during recess or in organized Little League or some other sport, games. They're games. They're supposed to be fun. Now, the thing that you have to remember is that you got to have a winner and a loser in a game. And it doesn't mean the end of the world if you lose. In fact, you can win. You could learn more from your losses than you do from a win. And
Absolutely.
I know that's been said plenty of times before. I can't quote who may have been the first one. Probably was Ben Franklin. Who knows? He had so many.
That's right.
But yeah, that's a given fact, is that you can learn more from your losses than you do your wins.
So you just touched on winning versus development, or where your priorities,
Right.
and then not being afraid to fail.
Exactly, because it's a game full of it.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what I tell kids all the time, I said, if you want to think about win and losses, I say you won because you played the game. Playing the game is the most important thing. Our kids nowadays are being taught to think so much about results. I got to get a hit. I got to win the game. They haven't been taught how to win a game. They really haven't been taught how to hit or play defense. They just know that they better do it. And the thing that you try to teach them is to enjoy the process. What Eddie said, having fun, is having fun going through the process. You know, I love the fact to get to the batter's box and go, you know, I can control my process, but I can't control whether I get a hit or not. But these coaches and parents are yelling and screaming at them, you got to get a hit, got to get a hit. And the kids are feeling the pressure of that, and that's too much.
So what about if maybe like a certification program is too much, at least having a coach's clinic or a parent's clinic day with someone like yourself to go over some things to make sure everyone's on the same page? Well, I would have loved to have seen you come out to one of our leagues when I was coaching and give an overview of some fundamentals.
Well, I just didn't want to come out there and show you up, Steve.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, no, I'm just
I would have gladly stepped aside.
But I think you do a great job because you have the ultimate patience. And I think you don't have to be super knowledgeable about a game to be a good coach. I think you have to be a good coach of kids, of people. And you got to be very, very patient with the fact that they're not going to be perfect every game they go out there, even though their expectations are to be. And we as coaches have to let them know that it's okay to miss a ball. You're going to miss them. I was a pro for 17 years, and I missed a lot of them. And Eddie was probably the best infielder around, but he missed them. But what he learned was knowing how to recover from that and go right back to the next play. And we ought to teach our kids that.
Well, and going back to what you're talking about, more specifically, they do have programs. I mean, they do. I know there are the little leagues, they have their time with the coaches where they have their sessions, and they alert them or they talk about what is expected from the coaches and what has happened, though, it's gotten into the parents are also admonished and or alerted to how they should conduct themselves during these games. And so there's, less yelling at the umpires and only support your team players, your son and his teammates. You can't make any calls, yelling at the other team, which is all good. But, once again, sometimes that stuff gets lost in the actual coaching of the game by some individuals. Apparently, it happens a lot more than we'd like to see.
Well, I think here locally, I always say the old saying is if you don't like the games other people play, don't talk about it, do something about it. And, actually, not to promote our own programs, but our plans are to start programs here in the near future that we have more control over kids. Some activity programs that we're looking to do, our baseball programs, and introducing kids to baseball and get them early to where they can realize that they can have fun, that they can come out and not have the pressure of looking over their shoulders, worrying that if they make one little mistake that somebody's going to, criticize them or get on them or be firm with them. There's all different ways to teach. Some kids you just tell them what to do and they'll do it. Some kids you can show them what to do and they'll do it. Some kids it just takes a little time for them to understand. Mm-hmm. And some kids need a little push and a shove here and there. A little more attention than others. I say not discipline, but just attention. Some kids crave that attention, and sometimes you give them a little extra. But not to be derogatory about their talent level may not be as high as another person, but you have to make them feel like it is in a way that they are a human being. The baseball part of it is not that important, but how you grow as a human being, I think, is the lesson that kids should be learning. And our plan is to attack that situation. Not to what degree, I don't know. How many kids, we don't know, but like I said, if you're going to complain about it, do something about it, and that's what we plan to do.
So what about what you guys think about how discipline is handled at the youth level on a baseball field from the coach's point of view? I know we've talked about some coaches use running as punishment, and that may that may turn a kid off. That may tell a kid might not want to come out to practice the next day. What do you guys think about that?
Well, you know what? I don't think, when we were growing up, Leon, I don't think we ever were punished in Little League.
Never.
I can never remember being punished. And do I know exactly why? My guess is right now, in thinking about it, is because we were very fortunate to have grown up at a time when we were able to hone our skills, so to speak, on our own, in the playgrounds, at the parks, without any coaching, just some of the neighborhood kids getting together, playing catch, playing 3-5, and I know we've talked about this before, playing 3 flies up, playing home run derby, and then playing games. Whether we had 3 guys on a team or 4 or 5, and so what that did for us is it gave us a skill, it gave us a very good understanding of how to play the game at a young age, so that when we got into Little League with these parents, all they had to do is organize the practices and make out a lineup and assign here and there, maybe for a bunt or whatever in situations. But otherwise, we were allowed to just play the game and have fun. And so I think having had the ability, now there's less need for instruction, a whole ton of instruction which is good because most of the parents weren't qualified in a sense to do a whole lot of instruction. So what they did was they spent their time conducting the practice, making out lineups for games, who was going to pitch and all that, and I think that's what lends itself to how it's different now as far as what the penalties are for and how they do that. I can't understand why they would do it, but if it's happening, man.
I heard a coach the other day. I heard a coach just recently. I mean, a couple of kids did a couple of things. They end up losing the game, and the coach says, I want to let you guys decide what your punishment's going to be. I mean, it's almost like etched in stone that there has to be some punishment. And I'm going to myself, why? I mean, they played the game. I mean, there's a couple of natural things. The kids are going to make some mistakes. You're going to lose some games. You might have a discussion about it. But I don't think anything that happens on the field warrants punishment per se, unless you break a rule and the league finds you, or you're disrespectful and you beat somebody up, you get kicked off the team. But after a game, you say, well, what's your punishment? You're going to run 10 laps, or you're going to have to do 5,000 push-ups, or some sit-ups. I mean, to me, running is the worst punishment on earth, because you shouldn't ever run for punishment. You should run because you love to run, number one. Number two is you have an obligation, no matter where, to have some sort of condition to play sports, and kids will do that. All you got to say, we want you to be in shape, and I guarantee they'll go get in shape if you want to play. That's just an obligation. We were always in shape. We never thought about being out of shape.
Well,
but you don't run. Hey, if you do something wrong, go run.
Yeah,
if you do something wrong, go run. Well, the kids growing up looks like running is a terrible thing. If I got my own decision, I am not going to run today, because if nobody's making me run, I'm not running.
Right.
But they should look forward to running, because it's all part of the conditioning in order to be a good baseball player.
Well, like you said it, when we were young, we ran all the time.
All the time.
And once again, now
you
that
ran to the park.
It speaks to what type of environment we grew up in compared to the kids now. And so that was automatic with us, learning how to, now, if you want to even go deeper, how Little Leagues were organized back then, if you tried out for a Little League team and you didn't make it, that was it. That was it. And so Little League teams were made up of pretty much the kids who could play. And most all those kids are going to be able to run if they're halfway decent athletes at that age. If they are, you don't need conditioning at 8, 9, 10 years old,
No.
11 years old. You don't need conditioning. You go out there in a hard practice, and you got your conditioning. That was
enough.
it. You swing the bat, you play catch, and you're running around in there. You're getting your work. That's all you needed. And I can't see now. Is it different these days? Obviously. And why? Because they've allowed lesser talented, lesser athletic kids into the game. And I'm not going to get into the reasons why Little League has done it. We all know, hey, if you pay your money, Steve, you pay your money for your child to be, and if he's not good enough, well, we'll make another team with all the other kids that aren't good enough, because we're going to keep that money. We don't want to give it back.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate because then the kids with the talent are at the risk of getting complacent, not being pushed to show their talent, how good they can be by being pushed through a competitive situation.
But you think about it, Eddie, in our day, when you brought that up, if you had 8 teams, and I'll just say 10 players on a team, that's 80 players, easy math, and there's 120 kids come out. Well, do the math.
Yeah.
That's 40 of them aren't going to make it.
Exactly.
Now, what happens from that is, in our day, and I know that for a fact, I don't know about nowadays, because if you pay your money, you're on the team, you're playing. But I heard a lot of times kids in our neighborhood would go, well, I didn't make the junior varsity team in football this year, but I'm going to work my butt off and I'm going to make the team next year.
Sure.
I'm going to make myself better because I'm going to prove to people I can make this club. It gives you that extra incentive to get better, because the bottom line, that's a part of life. You try out, you make the grade, you get the job.
There you go. And that is an incentive and a motivation to continue playing.
Exactly right.
And it goes right back to the beginning where you spoke about the number of kids, or the percentage of kids that leave the game at such an early age. Well, now there's a lot of reasons for that. And I know we've touched on some of this stuff, but and there are a number of them. We can go through them 1 through 3, 4, 5, or however many. The change of the family unit.
Yeah.
We learned by playing. When I was just a tyke, you're playing catch with your older brothers or your dad.
Exactly.
And how many kids are doing that now? We talked about going to the parks and playgrounds on our own with just the neighborhood kids. Well, how many kids are allowed to go to the parks? Because why? Because social situations changed. Parents didn't feel comfortable letting their young kids, be by themselves out at the parks for fear of, and we know what those fears are.
Yeah.
And
but now, Eddie, not to cut you off, but in our day, probably was the same situation as if we never heard about it.
Well, no,
but nowadays with social media,
sure,
everybody hears about it more. Well, I don't know. I could be wrong.
You could have a point there, yeah, and because it's not like it wasn't there,
right?
It's just like well, even though things were happening, and like you said, we were hearing about it now in the news, social media, in the news. Had parents not been fearful of doing that, would we have had more incidents, or just the same, or none, had it been just like when we were growing up? In other words, even though there was news about stuff happening to kids being abducted and what have you, if parents still let their kids go out there, well, in numbers, kids are usually safer.
I agree.
Yeah,
I think,
and maybe they wouldn't have had those. We wouldn't have had
those
the situation,
concerns, those worries.
Yeah, and so the situation could have developed differently through as kids got older, and maybe been more programmed to play, like what he said, like what we're talking about.
So
So
Sacramento,
who
you know,
knows?
Sacramento's a much more populous than it used to be. I know when we were younger, it wasn't a big city. It was kind of a little town, farming town type. Everybody kind of knew everybody a little more. Probably that's part of it. But at the same time, I think we were more outdoors in general. Technology hadn't taken over. We didn't sit in the house on a computer.
No.
We had to be outside. I mean, my father was a plumber contractor, and when I wasn't doing anything else, sometimes I had to go help him work. And so there's a confidence that happens that you know how to handle yourself outside.
Exactly.
You know how to deal with
a little bit of street sense.
Right, a little bit more street sense. And kids nowadays don't have that same street sense.
Exactly.
And I think those are areas that change, you know. And I was using a pick to dig into that hard pan ground, and that, you know, my hands got a little stronger, my resolve got a little stronger, and you know, if somebody messed with me, I was ready to, you know, get it going. Yeah, I was ready to go. You know, I didn't. You know, our father said you used to have somebody push you around too much, you take care of it.
I'd have to mow the lawn or pull weeds before I was able to. But sure, boys, I was on that lawn early and watering, and then I'm off to the park.
You're gone.
And we're playing, and we're out there all day until it's time to eat.
You better believe it.
And now what has changed, though, is because the kids are more sedentary, they're more inside, they're more technology savvy, but they weren't technically into activity sports. So what happens, and what has happened, parents are now pushing their kids to participate. Sometimes for the good, but sometimes not for the good. There are some kids that are only playing, and we're only playing whenever, because their dad wanted them to play.
Right.
And that creates problems.
Literally had a kid tell me one time, I don't really like baseball. Then why are you playing? Because if I didn't, my dad would kill me. That was the answer. And then you also have situations where parents are busy. You got two parents working, trying to make the ends meet. So these drop-off situations for baseball programs are perfect for them, because they could drop their kid off. They got a babysitting service there, and they can go do what they got to do. And, you know, in our day, that just didn't happen. I mean,
No.
You know, that just didn't happen. I mean,
Well, we had, if you had a game on a weekend, and there was some event or out of town, whether it was out of town or even just the other side of town, that your parents found a way to get you to your game.
Period.
You did. Nowadays, what's happening? Nowadays, and it's gotten into high school, Steve, where kids are missing games because of a dental appointment, a doctor. You know, there's no.
Oh my God! You see it all. Exactly. You're right.
The parents do not hold their kids accountable for. You join a team. You're a part of the team. You've made a commitment. You've got to honor that commitment. And so there's a very loose situation when it comes to that, and that drives coaches nuts. But you can't do anything about it.
I mean, there's a conversation all the time now in youth baseball. Well, we have 15 kids on our team, but usually only 11 or 12 show up. So you got to carry more on your roster because they're not always going to be here. Well, I'm thinking if you got 15 kids on your team, you got to try to find a way to play 15, because you assume all 15 are going to be there every game. But that's not the fact.
Yeah, that brings up another point where kids may get discouraged, is how coaches handle playing time. And I've seen a lot of articles about that.
But, you know, you see it a lot now, and Eddie will probably concur with me. In our day, I always go back to the day, I mean, you earned your playing time. Mm-hmm. You know, I agree to a large degree. Now, when you have a topic, the winning versus development, I think in the youth programs, and if you have 14, 15 kids on the club, you have to really bypass that thought of playing your best players, so to speak, or for the sake of winning, because now you still have that frame of mind that you're trying to develop talent. So even though you go through your practice, you still want to put players in the game and get them play time, but you have to do it smartly, because you want to put kids in situations that they could succeed at as often as possible to build their confidence. You're not doing a kid a favor if he's your 15th guy and he's never played, and all of a sudden you got a kid out on the mound throwing bullets, or I should say for the novice, throwing really, really hard, and he doesn't have really good control, and then you got a kid who's never faced something like that. You can't actually put him in the batter's box at that time just because you haven't gotten him in the bat yet, because you're setting him up for failure and added fear. Because kids are quitting if they get hit. They get hit by a ball, they're quitting. So you're trying to build their confidence and their self-esteem.
Like you said, you're building their development. You gotta figure a way to build the kids' development, and by building their self-esteem and confidence first, that makes it a little easier for the kids who have lesser talent. But you're also building character for that kid later on in life, that he's going to learn from these experiences, and he's also going to take from how that coach treated him. And
That's right.
there are kids that 10 years later, out of Little League, they remember things that a coach, how he treated them, and they either respect them because of it, or they'll talk negatively about those coaches.
But you know, sometimes you get these coaches and they're in a game, and little Johnny is the hottest hitter on the team, or he's the best player on the team, and all of a sudden that coach is thinking, well, I'm going to take him out because I'm going to let little Jimmy get in there and get some time. Well, Johnny's at bat comes up, and it's a tie ball game, and Jimmy's up, and that coach is sitting there going like, I ain't doing this again because I want Johnny up in this situation because we need to win this ball game. And you see a lot of that. The coaches that have been around a little bit, they go, well, I want to win this ball game, so son, you just got to wait until. And that's not really fair, because that's where that line goes when you're thinking about development and building character over winning the ball game.
Well,
it's tough for an amateur coach to do that.
Absolutely, but and if it's a situation where that kid hasn't had an opportunity yet, and you just want to all of a sudden, oh shoot, he came in late in the game, and like you said, he had one at bat, but he didn't fare well. And so now in this crucial situation at the end of the game, for the sake of winning, the coach, maybe better that he let the kid either experience a failure and not be successful, instead of for the other. Even though every time you step on now that's an individual thing. Every time you step between the lines with that uniform on, you play to win. But this isn't what we're talking about, right? This is a decisions that coaches are being put in to change the way a player, a young kid, perceives that whole situation and how it's being handled.
But I always think that if you teach a kid how to win, you have a formula. There is a formula to me how to win. To me, it's like, what can a kid control? You can control a little bit more how you teach a kid how to catch a ball. It's a little more predictable. How to run the bases a little more. Hey, you got speed, let's utilize. Those are things,
physical
aspects you can control. You can control those more than your offense even, because you can actually have pretty good hitters, but any particular time in the game, there's still no guarantee that kid's going to get a hit. So, if you take your whole team and look at every individual talent, and then you all, as a coach, you start saying you got 10 or 12 individuals, different personalities, different talent levels. And how do I control these situations, or how do I put a kid in a situation to succeed where his strengths are? Most coaches don't really know how to do that, because it's my way or the highway type thing. I coach everybody the same way. You do what I tell you to do. You do as I tell you, and everybody's going to play this type of baseball game, where you may have a second baseman in there who's really a third baseman, or a third baseman who's better in center field, or a center fielder who's better at first. But the coach wants them to play those positions, and the kid has no say-so.
Right.
They have no say-so over their playing, so they really go home a lot of times and they're going, well, the coach really didn't take advantage. I mean, they probably don't know how to verbalize that, but the coach didn't take advantage of where my real strengths are, And to me, I'm a hitting guy, but in a game, when I managed and coached, I didn't put the emphasis on the hitting part. I put the emphasis on the pitching and the defense, because those are the things that you have more control over. Whether a pitcher can throw a strike. Well, you got to teach the kids how to throw strikes.
Right.
Teach them how to throw strike. Don't teach them how to throw a curveball. Teach them how to throw a strike. Your defense, you teach them the basic fundamentals of having fun when a ball comes to you, the basic fundamentals of catching a ground ball. Don't try to teach them how to catch the great play, and don't get mad at them when they miss the great play.
Yeah.
So your point being, you got to really coach to the individual.
Coach to the individual, and the kids are going to enjoy it a lot more. But I agree with Eddie that sometimes your lesser player needs to be in those tough situations, and then you pat him on the back, because every now and then when he succeeds, boy, I tell you what a joy that is.
It's going to mean a lot to him.
It's going to mean a lot to him.
Yeah, and I've coached, and we brought this up with my nephew before. We coached him a couple times to, in a position to succeed, as you said, but knowing that he could fail, just to build that character, to understand how to recover from failure. So we sacrifice the winning for the development,
Right.
in within certain conditions, in certain situations, and we thought that was best for him at that time, and it turned out to be. We were fortunate, but
I will, in closing this conversation, it's a great conversation, and we could talk about it forever. But me personally, as a professional, and I think we'll agree, is we say the game is built around failure. I think that kids are going to experience failure, but really, I don't even really like that word. I don't think we should use that phrase, failure, when you make an error. Because if you went after the ball, you made an effort at it, and the ball took a little hop, you say, well, he missed it, he failed. And the real definition of failure is, it can be pretty drastic, but in baseball, you just missed it. I don't think you should think of it as a failure. I think you just look at it as the fact that you missed it.
You weren't successful.
You were.
And it's a learning.
But we put that connotation on young kids'
and
head.
it
It's
could
like,
become
I'm a
stigma.
failure.
It could become it could have a stigma connotation to it.
Yeah,
It's really it's a learning opportunity.
It is.
Or we learn how to deal with it, obviously. Well, I can deal with strikeouts. I went 0 for 37 one time. I mean, you talking about being in a desperate boat. I mean, the fence looked like it was 2,000 feet, and it looked like every pitcher was throwing 122 mile an hour. Mm-hmm. But I kept going up there, and all of a sudden it clicked, and the next thing you know, it's like, how in the world I go 0 for 37? But it happens. It happens.
Well, I think we probably wanted to wrap this one up, but this is probably a subject that we want to do another podcast on. I know there's a couple more points that we wanted to talk about, maybe some of the organizations that are trying to change things like PCA or the MLB Play Ball Initiative, and maybe we want to touch on how some of these organizations are trying to change this perception or deal with some of these issues.
Yeah, the Positive Coaching Alliance doing. Major League Baseball is making initiatives. I think it's a topic of discussion, but the fact is you can't talk about it. You have to do things. But I also think a lot of the responsibility lies with parents too. Mm-hmm. I think parents should prepare their kids the right way. I think, not to say not really the right way, but to prepare in the fact that they may not play sometimes. They may strike out sometimes. It's not the end of the world. And I don't think parents should be talking about to other people how good their sons are, because it puts a lot of pressure on them to perform. And then they come up with excuses. Well, this kid went ahead of my son, and my son is way better than this kid. Those conversations need to stop. I really do. I think that puts a lot of pressure on kids unnecessarily. It's like Aquila and the Bee. it's a movie where it's a spelling bee, and the mother was telling the son what letter to spell a word. He was whispering, and then when they got caught, she said, "Oh no, he knew that," and the son said, "No, I didn't. I didn't know it, Mom." Don't answer for him. Let them.
Final thoughts.
One final thought. Doesn't this all come down to baseball now at the youth level? And that's not speaking to the tournament ball. This is speaking to league, whether it's Cal Ripken or Little League, the organizations. It's turned into a participation sport,
right,
as opposed to a competition sport. And so that should speak a lot to how these kids are dealt with by the coaches and by the leagues themselves when it comes. You can't put so much emphasis on winning if it's a participation sport. And that
You're
would
right.
be my final
thought. That's a good point.
That's a good point. So we'll probably do another podcast on this subject, and we've got a lot more things to talk about.
Well, I'm hoping, Steve, before you close, I'm hoping if any of those parents out there listening to send in some thoughts and questions, we'll have a conversation about it. And don't get mad at us if we don't agree with you.
Yeah, it's okay. So again, the podcast site is talkingbaseballwithleonlee.podbean.com, and as Leon just said, please send us your questions and comments to talkingbaseballwithleonlee@gmail.com, and we'll post that information along with this podcast. And we'll talk to you all again soon.